Today we have an amazing guest. Her name is Alex. She is a former Google leader and currently an amazing Logitech leader. I love that she's in sales because it is so fitting when it comes to teaching us all how to sell ourselves. Alex, you
Hmm.
have an incredible story. That's why I brought you in. You have an incredible story of how you basically took your entire family to another country. And it is a very brave story that helps us understand your passion around really helping people advocate for themselves in the workplace and sell themselves. So I'm going to open up the floor for you to share with us your story.
I head up our strategy and enablement, sales enablement, a lot of storytelling there as well within B2B for our global enterprise teams at Logitech. But what I do at Logitech, and I have been doing it for a while also outside of Logitech, is that I started giving these free workshops. They're called I Am Remarkable. They're part of a bigger program and now an organization called I Am Remarkable. And I'm telling you about this because this is going to play a big role in the story that I'm about to tell you. The story goes a little bit like this, and I think a lot of people can relate. You're in your career, your head's down, your projects. At least I'm very competitive, going after the next big thing, the next big opportunity at work. I also obviously wanted to get promoted. And then I got pregnant, and that's a very exciting time for anyone, especially women, but it can be very daunting too. Lots of big changes. And then on top of it, COVID hit. So you can imagine like my anxiety level shot up. And, anyways, I was still very much focused on work because, like a lot of you, if you remember, that was almost the only thing anyone was allowed to do is like work and sleep, and because you needed to stay at home and never got to go out. So at the time, pregnant, COVID, I did deliver on my targets. I did deliver on the big projects I was working on, like you name it, everything, right? So the time comes in this period where I'm going for the next promo cycle. It was a long time coming. My allies at work, my supporters, my champions, totally convinced this is my round, this is my time, I'm up for it. And no, that was not the case. Whoa, like that's a shock. Went through my performance review, thought, okay, maybe something's off. No, performance review, perfect, excellent, stellar, you're amazing. But there's this little bit missing, just a little bit, and it would have been okay. And I'm like, what is that little bit? Like, tell me more, right? I'm curious. I want to know. I'm competitive. Show me, right? Tell me more what that would entail. It was just very ambiguous feedback, things like that. So then I come back from mat leave, right? I very much felt at that point I was kind of parked in the ramp up zone. Oh, you're coming back from maternity leave. It's difficult. It's a time to ramp up, things like that. And I would say, though, it's important to note here, just a little digression, that that's important too. Women and men, so fathers, they need the ramp up period. I agree with that. But when it stretches kind of like 3-4 months, I start questioning it a little bit. I should be able to name the speed that I need if that choice is open, right? If that choice is given. So I started asking, I'm ready to really speed this up now. I'm back to my old amount of projects, back to my, I want to have proper targets, et cetera, et cetera. Let's make a plan. And the answer was, let's hold off on that. Focus on your new role as a mother, right? Focus on family life. Focus on balancing it all, right? Because that's tough. And, you know, there will be time for career progression and bigger projects later. Whoa, like what? What are we talking about here? Because I had separated the two like anyone would do. So I thought this conversation was about career progression. All of a sudden, we were kind of discussing my capacity in terms of family dynamics and commitments. So I thought, okay, this is not in line with the way I thought it would go. And it was actually so shocking for me. I had to sit on it for a couple of months actually and really think through it. What does that mean? Like, where is my voice in all of this? Like, why was this choice like taken away from me, right? And that's when I started participating in I Am Remarkable workshops. And it doesn't need to be that one. I'm just saying it was a really great chance at the time and it was free. So I had easy access to it. And I started also working with a coach. And from there on out, I started realizing I need to start taking charge and control and creating sense out of this ambiguity and this only this little bit is missing. I needed to define that, and I needed to start making choices about my branding and my professional career, and most importantly maybe like knowing and finding my strengths, right? Because clearly that little bit was missing. What was it? I didn't know. So I needed to also search inside myself. And most importantly, at the time, then I thought I needed to find, before anything else, I needed to find my inner voice. Once I figured that out, it was a key moment for me. I pivoted and I decided, well, you know what? That's okay. Like, that wasn't really the greatest experience there, but it was still over many years an experience that was super important to me. It built me. It I grew from that, and now it's time to grow again, right? So I pushed through that. I ended up, by sheer chance, I ended up moving to Switzerland. I now landed at Tech, which is absolutely wonderful, and where I continue to grow. So I hope I can share my experiences and insights.
That's an amazing story, Alex. I mean, there's so many things that I believe a lot of people can identify with. I know that I've had a lot of clients who are fathers and mothers who had to deal with you're excited because you brought in an addition to your family. And all of a sudden, you walk into the workplace with that excitement, hoping that your coworkers and your leaders who have gotten to know you at a personal level would be happy for you. And then you feel like you're being penalized for something that is a normal part of life. So it is really disheartening to keep hearing this. You're not the first person who shares this with me, but no matter how many times I hear this, my reaction is never calmer. It truly reminds me of my own story
Mm,
of not being promoted, even leaving the corporate world. Um, Mine was a little bit different. Did not understand why I wasn't getting promoted because, like you shared, I was doing all of the right things. It didn't feel like there was a logical reason because everything was there on paper. I was hitting all the targets, but for
mhm,
some reason, I was being told, you're not ready, you're not ready, you're not ready.
mm,
And for me, if I were to look back and change something, I'd say maybe spending more time building those relationships, not putting so much pressure on myself and putting my head down and working. That's something that I would change. But I would also change the fact that I would have probably left even sooner than that, knowing what I know today. So I am glad you worked with someone to recognize your greatness versus with others, what happens is a lot of us get this lack of recognition or maybe negative feedback. Maybe you internalize it a little bit at the beginning, but you didn't let it stop you. And look at where you are.
it's easy to look back once you've grown from it and you're kind of past it. Where it becomes difficult, and we will talk about this up today, I think, Nada, is the difference that it makes, and you touch on that, is when you have allies or champions or immediate stakeholders who will support you, right, within your team or your organization, give you that type of guidance or feedback to help with that growth, right? Where it gets really, really hard is when you're left on your own devices to figure it out by
That's
yourself.
definitely
You
lonely. And we can
know?
create our own prison,
Yeah,
when we go through
and
this.
absolutely.
I am curious about a few things before we get into some practical advice for folks.
Mm,
If you were to go back to your older self that was in that moment that just got this news of, hey, you're not ready to get promoted,
mhm.
feeling the way you were feeling, what advice, knowing what you know today, would you give yourself?
Sometimes you can't see past your own little area anymore. Sometimes it's worth looking up and looking around and reaching out and talking to people. Maybe also gaining a bit of distance from the situation that you're in. Get greater objectivity.
We can definitely be in our little own bubble and drown in it. But
Mm.
I'm guessing what I'm hearing is you're saying to me that all of these happy social media posts don't always reflect the realities of people, that successful people actually struggle, is what I'm hearing.
They struggle and it's okay.
Yeah.
Like the one thing that I learned from it all is that without that struggle, I would have been kind of bothered at the time to even truly look at myself and my career, where it's going, and wanting to do something about it, because I have to say it was fairly comfortable in that sense. But then there's friction and there's a struggle, right? So if you think about any, like, movie or a hero journey, and I know that's a big theme in your coaching as well, Nada, right? So there has to be a struggle, or at least human nature is kind of that way, in order for you to take action or create this urgency for yourself to then step forward and decide to deal with it.
So, based on your experience, you facilitated sessions for people who feel awkward selling themselves in the workplace, people who are at a disadvantage, they're underrepresented, whether they fit in a certain gender, whether there is some bias towards them, ageism. I fit in a lot of these categories, and I actually am grateful because I wouldn't have grown the way I have.
Yeah.
But having said that, why do you think people feel so awkward?
One is the upbringing, I would say. So your immediate upbringing in the house, in the family, um, family dynamics. And then there's, I think, also culture. For me, or as women, I often hear this. We're kind of brought up where bragging or like self-promoting or feels like bragging, that doesn't sound right for women to do, or so not so sure with the newer generations if that's still the case, but I'd say with our generation, I think there's a little bit still from that. Also, not everyone is naturally inclined to want to speak about themselves. So there's also character traits involved, maybe intrinsic beliefs, right? Kind of saying, why should I say anything? Clearly, my work speaks for itself. Anyone can see my work. These are assumptions that we shouldn't necessarily have or take, especially when it comes to the workplace, right? So, not like just believing that I will put my head down, never say anything, but the work that I'm delivering is always going to speak for itself. That is not necessarily true, at least not for me. That, hence my story, right? The other thing that I think people need to consider is that the thing is that when if you remain quiet, and that's anyone's prerogative, right? They can do as they wish. But where I try to challenge my workshop participants is also with look, if you don't do it, there's plenty of other people who will, like,
Yes, and how
promote
would it
themselves.
feel if someone else who is not as performing as well as you are gets promoted and you don't, right?
Mhm. So, and again, it comes back to this will question, right? If that's your goal and that's your will and you want to do this, then one method to start out with is gotta brand yourself. That also means, well, you kind of gotta show your work, or show what you're doing, or show what you're good at, show what you stand for as well, right? And that then kind of breaks it back down. And the next questions that come up in the workshop, well, I don't necessarily know what that is. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily know how to talk about my strengths. Like, I haven't really identified my strengths or all of my strengths, right? So now we're at that level. We're like, okay, all right, let's talk about it now then.
I definitely agree with you in
Mm,
terms of a lot of people, shockingly, they're so good at what they do, but they don't recognize it themselves. It's such a counterintuitive concept because you think that on the outside, that person must know that they're amazing. How
yeah,
else
right.
would they be amazing, right?
Yeah.
But you often hear people who are so amazing at what they do say, "Oh, it's no big deal. You know, I didn't think this was something that was special."
Mhm.
And that's a symptom. If any of you feel that way, it's a symptom of you having a gift, right? When something comes so easily for us, it's hard for us to explain it. And sometimes, you need a facilitator like Alex who can see it from the outside and help you recognize it. And that's something that I definitely also help people with, is identifying their career sweet spot, knowing what your superpower is. I think a lot of it also comes from is that many of us are jack of all trades. We're
Yeah.
also good at many
Yeah.
things, and we have all these competing things because the nature of organizations is we're thrown into fires that we have to put out.
Yeah. Absolutely. So then a lot of people approach me with like, especially those all rounders, they're having a hard time to almost decide on like an array of strengths or an array of,
Mm,
because they're kind of caught in this loop of, well, I'm not just good at data and I don't want to become a data specialist. This kind of, this fear now plays into it, is that they'll be branded solely and only as a
pigeonholing.
person. Yeah, exactly, right. So then it's like, let's take a step back, and let's first, the exercise is defining our strength. Also because maybe we want to define particular areas that we're passionate about. Sometimes it's not just about, am I really good at crunching numbers, but you also want to have some sort of emotional connection to that, right? Because that's what makes you great, when there's passion behind it as well. And now I'm connecting it back to self promoting. That's where you self will feel like you're not bragging. You're talking about a passion of yours, simultaneously also a strength, and you're promoting that at the same time. So you're promoting yourself. Usually in the workshop, I start out, when we go run through this exercise that I walk people through, is let's start in a place of strengths that you're proud of, maybe in your home, maybe in
Mm.
your private life. Let's, before we get into anything else, let's talk about that. And so usually when I start out with very small groups, and I, break them out. And if there's any leaders on the call looking for inspiration, what they can do with their teams, it's a great way. Start out small, break out your teams into smaller groups so they can discuss with each other and have an intimate setting. And I speak about my own experience, right? So at home, I'm passionate about being with my son, with my dog, and I am doing all of sorts of things in terms of my hobbies with my dog, or swimming with my son. The strength that I then quote back to my participants is that, well, I think my strength in all that is and amazing organizers, because let me tell you, all these activities, like, it's tough. Any parent out there knows. And B, I've developed a huge amount of patience dealing with a very energetic pet that's all over the place.
God, you're reminding me of what I'm dealing with right now. I was
Right?
literally holding my breath. Just so you all know, I have a dog here. He's in his
Oh,
little carrier, and he's being nice to us all by not barking. So I definitely
thank you.
understand the things that we have to deal with as human beings.
You all are getting the point, right? So lots of patience, and then we build it from there. How can I now translate this? And we take the same exercise, we bring it over to now the professional side of the house, right? So, okay, what am I passionate about and what is simultaneously my strength? I'll give you an example. We kind of do this little exercise in writing that essentially first I have everyone write down a sentence and it needs to start out with, I am remarkable because. And then you start writing it down. Then you discuss it with your counterpart. You've now established a relationship with them as well. So I'll give the audience an example that I use. I'm remarkable because I have great spatial visualization and I use it to my advantage for abstract concepts or problems, meaning I can easily visualize problems, objects, pictures all in my head, all at once. And I can go through an exercise of taking it apart into many details, but also zooming out and then looking at the big picture. And this helps me in business a lot, right? This makes me a good business or commercial leader. Mhm.
So, just to ensure that I understand this, where you start is truly not just going through this tool and figuring out what our strengths are. It's marrying those strengths with your passions, because oftentimes what I see, especially with high achievers, is that people get lost in doing things that they're good at, but they don't enjoy. And
Yeah.
that was the case for me for many years as a consultant. I was a Jedi at putting out fires, but did I enjoy going on these spreadsheets and number crunching?
Mhm.
No. There were pockets that I enjoyed, and maybe I wasn't still, developed in those areas, and I was scared of pursuing them further because I just focused on the things that I was a master on, right? And that sort of distract me from my passions. So what you're doing here is beautiful, because you're helping people realize that maybe there are areas that they haven't noticed about themselves that they love, that if they just spent more time on, they would be
Mhm.
amazing at. And then the second takeaway that I'm getting from this is there's a lot of conversation that goes on, because you can sit there and go online and do a robotic, test and
Yeah.
get a bunch of results. But
Mhm.
until you actually talk about it with someone,
Yeah.
especially someone who's trained to be able to interpret your results and ask you questions and
Yeah.
help you retell your story, that's the magic. And especially when you're sharing with
Mhm.
me that this happens in a setting where people are in the same boat,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. But
So
mhm.
that is amazing. I really, really, really love that.
Yeah, and again, just to be clear with everyone, and piggyback off of what you said, if you start out with strengths that are connected with your passion, it's so much easier to talk about it because the name of the today's podcast implies find your inner voice.
Yes,
And so you got to start out in a place where you've got the energy going, that so you can feed off of that, right? um, and the other thing about talking to other people, again, this is going to play a very, very big role um, anywhere, whether it's your private life, but very, very big role obviously in your career and your career building, getting that feedback from others, because you need a sounding board, you need to know what it sounds like as well, right?
absolutely. So we got an incredible question here that's coming
Mhm.
in that I'd love you to answer. Say you buy into the value of self promotion, you've identified your strengths. So I know the first step. This is like rule number one in Alcoholic Anonymous: be aware that you have a problem or a struggle, right? And be receptive to working on it. So that's step number one, is what our listener is sharing with us here. But now, where do you do this self promotion, right? And I guess step number two is learning how to promote yourself. But then how do you go about doing this in the workplace? Do you do
Yeah.
this in every conversation with the team? Is it more targeted with leaders
Yeah.
on social media? How do you do this in order to grow your career as a
And
professional?
I get this question a lot because this is the place where it's easy to do this at home and you can practice. Back to the concept of we don't want to brag, right? The foundation of it should be in something obviously that's true and that's backed up by data. So we're not bragging. And where do you do it? Should you be doing it everywhere all the time like that? No, I think, and you're building a brand, right? So you want to insert yourself in moments where it feels natural and comfortable to you, right? And where it also makes sense. I mean, sometimes there's opportunities where you're actually asked to present in front of leaders to do something X, Y, and Z, right? So those are very obvious choices where you definitely want to make sure you self promote your work, what you have done, what your part was in that project, etc. Definitely don't be shy. Start out small, start out with your current stakeholders and allies at work. You want to start out small, and the more comfortable you get yourself with promoting a project, your strength, the easier it will get that when the time comes and you see an opportunity in front of a leader because you get stuck in an elevator with them and then you try it there or in front of a group of leaders, that's, you build up to it. You don't skip all those levels though. I mean, you could, but I don't recommend it. So build it, right?
I agree with a lot of what you're saying, Alex, is in the sense that, you know, going there and saying, I'm awesome in front of every single person whenever you have the opportunity is not what we're talking about here, right? We're not talking, you're sitting in a meeting and you're constantly, reminding your coworkers of how you're great at what you do, etc. Selling is not about bragging. Selling is about helping people and exchanging value.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of you forget that when you're self-promoting yourself, it's not about saying I am this and I am that. First of all, it's about showing curiosity about the other person.
Yeah.
That's where you want to start in every single conversation. You want to know what are the things that this person struggles with and how you can help. How can I help? That's the first question that you need to ask yourself. And then how you sell yourself is actually showing the other person on the other side of the table how you can help them. When you do that, you are actually self promoting yourself because you're positioning yourself as the person who is going to give value to the person. Okay. So, an analogy that I give a lot of people is think of yourself as Gandalf in Lord of the Rings. You are the guide, not the hero. Think about it. Any person who's selling a service is a guide. You, as an employee in an organization, you're guiding something. And so when you shift away from talking about how you're awesome and all of these other things to this is how I can guide you and help you, and I got you, and I'm here for you, that is the best way to promote yourself. And you're not going to feel weird and icky because you're taking the spotlight, especially if you're an introvert, away from you and putting it towards the person that you're helping.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And now we're entering a territory because we need to connect it to concepts. And I love that. We're entering a territory where you're also building relationships, right? So you're this is where, at least in sales, you're kind of in a place of consultative selling, building relationships, that type of thing, but it's applicable. The concepts are kind of very similar, and we need to connect it to concepts, right? I was giving you an example of an I am remarkable statement. That's because
Yes.
you have now identified for yourself
Absolutely. You
that you're
start
remarkable.
there before you sell yourself,
Yeah,
right?
you have now realized, okay, what it is that I want to talk about, and you're practicing in front of somebody else or the mirror and saying it. So great. Now you're kicking up, positivity also for your brain. Naturally, you don't go running around at work. I'm remarkable because I mean you could, but no. Now we need to connect it right to like actual moments and how that translates. And as Nada was describing it, absolutely. First, you before you even get to that part, talking about yourself and promoting yourself is, well, you got to have a bit of a ritual, right? The ritual of greetings. Hello, I am Alex. How are you? And then next, tell me what's going on in your world. So step one, showing curiosity, right? And you want
Yes.
to start listening. And so you need to go through this ritual. And that's how you start building not only relationships, you start building your stakeholder currency. So, you know, bigger and bigger and more valuable, but and creating connections. But this is where you start help create the moments where potentially, if you wanted to, could then insert yourself as well, either your skill, your team. If you're not self promoting, maybe you're promoting a project that you're attached to or a team that you're attached to as a leader. So it transcends that way.
I think this answers the question around, can you share some professional considerations while self promoting, the thin line between self promotion and bragging? And you answered it very well, Alex. Is that before you go into, sharing value with someone and letting them know what you can offer them, start with getting to know them, build that rapport and connection. Ask them questions, make them feel heard, understand what they're struggling with, because you want to first understand what they're struggling with before giving them the solution through your self promotion. Awesome. Okay, we got another question here. As an introvert who was also raised in a household where your work should show for itself,
Mhm.
I've always found it hard to self promote because to me it feels boastful and out of my nature. I actually got told at my previous job that because I didn't rub elbows enough and such things, I didn't get a promotion. Oh my God, Eric, I can totally identify with you as someone who was, well, I am still an introvert, believe it or not. I had to really work on myself to be able to come on these lives and speak to you all and even have a 30,000 following. But yes, 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 yes. I grew up as well in a household where I had to get straight A's. I came from a Middle Eastern culture where I had to either be a doctor or an engineer. And it was just awkward for me. And I always felt like my worth was tied to how much work I put in. So I definitely, definitely can relate to it. What do you think, Alex? Any tips for Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. I can relate, and this is my personal tips. There's a lot of advice out there, and my go-to that helps me. I'm considered.
The combination of extrovert and
It's
introvert.
it's that it's that I can be extroverted, like right now. I'm
Yeah.
energetic. What you need to do is you need to master powerful questions, is what I call them. So introverts have already one strength, which is super great, which is listening. They listen and they're very attentive. And then the second strength to develop is asking powerful questions. What are those? So, powerful questions usually start with a what or how or when, but they never ever start with why. And and they're always open ended. So, never a yes or no, right? So, for example, you can start asking, what's your take on this situation? How would you have gone about that? Or how was this possible? What else can be done? Right? So you have powerful questions, you start bringing it into the theme of whatever is the topic of the discussion, And it helps build that because they're open ended, and usually people like to be able to share their thoughts and opinions, especially. And the reason why you never ask why questions put people off, because they feel like you're asking judgmentally. Why are you doing this? Even if it's a very neutral tone, it comes across as you're questioning them, you're interrogating them, you're up to something. So don't use why. And that's then from there. What I also did, I still have it, and I still continue using it, is a questions bank. So I have a ton of powerful questions that
That's
over the
awesome.
years, yeah, I wrote them down. I keep writing them down in a sheet. When I hear somebody ask a question that's very thought provoking, that, like, brought the room or the people to a halt and everybody started thinking, I write it down. I write down like how that question was phrased. And then I use it, so that's kind of one of the steps that's really helpful, and that I suggest everyone do this.
That is oh my god, that's such excellent advice. I especially the advice around asking what versus why questions. I actually learned that as a coach when I was going through my coaching training, asking what versus why. When you ask a question that starts with why, it automatically creates some level of defensiveness for people. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, you're criticizing what I just suggested, or you're criticizing my idea. But when you're asking a question with what, it shows that you're just trying to come in with understanding in order to help the person. And absolutely love that you have a go to for powerful questions. I always encourage my clients to do a retrospective on projects that they've done. And hey, I'm going to borrow this and share it with my clients as well. In addition, as you're doing these retrospectives and percolating on what are things that did well and what are things that didn't do well, maybe we can put down what are some really good questions that I asked that got me further, that got me buy-in with stakeholders, that got me into alignment, that got people to open up to me. So that's amazing advice. And David, I really love the advice that you're giving Eric. Eric, being an introvert is not a weakness, actually. It is actually one of your secret weapons, because what it means to me is that you are good at listening. Introverts are very good listeners. And you know what? Part of selling yourself is actually demonstrating your powerful ability to make people feel heard. Sometimes you don't even need to speak to sell yourself. Sometimes it's your actions and your behaviors that sell you without saying anything. And yes, love the advice around, knowing what you need as a person, whether it's solitary time to energize yourself or
Mm.
whether it's engaging conversation to energize yourself. One of the biggest hot questions is, how do you navigate a political situation?
Yeah. Thanks,
We're
Nada.
both laughing because we went through
um,
that.
yeah, no, I mean, look, I am this is so what we did just now, we took you through like a really condensed version of a workshop in this podcast, starting at with, okay, let's find your strength, let's build out your strength, let's say your strength, let's practice, right? So role play. Then we went into how could this play out in a real kind of world situation? What are some pitfalls on the road? So we talked about that. I'm thinking about like a video game. So now you're right at the end of and you're reaching boss level, right? So now
Is this Super Mario
yeah,
with
Super
Bowser?
Mario, you go through the stages, Super Mario. Now you're at that level where, okay, now you gotta defeat the boss. Not your real boss, but in the game.
Well,
If
metaphorically, maybe.
metaphorically, if you want to reach that kind of, like, now you become the master, right? And let me tell you, it's really hard because now you're dealing with political situations or any type of a situation that warrants multiple streams of things happening with different pressure levels, maybe complex situations that are both emotional on one hand, involving some sort of commercial decision that needs to be made, whatever. And these now all come together and they converge, and maybe you're in the middle of it, or you and your team. How do you deal with it? What do you do? First of all, you need to have a network of stakeholders, because everything we just talked about leads up to the big part of you having now created a lot of conversations. You have now connected with a lot of people at your work. Hopefully, you have turned some of these folks into your allies at work, right? Maybe even your champions that champion on your behalf, right? And you are now tending to your beautiful stakeholder garden. Always tend to your stakeholders as if they were your home or your garden. And that's then when, only then, you can try, and I say try because I still try, master that type of complex situations where you have a lot of emotions going, you have a lot of agendas of
Mhm.
various people,
Yes, and
right?
that's what creates the politics is when you have a lot of conflicting
Yeah,
interests and you're
conflicting
trying to
interests. Yeah,
basically force everyone to have the same interest, but that's not what we're trying to do here.
no. But what we are trying to do is, number one, you definitely want to gather information and insights. And the only way to do that is through your network of allies, your network of stakeholders who can give you a little bit more information or their perspective to the situation of what's happening, right? You need to gather information. You need to know behavioral insights. So what motivates that person to say it like that, right? That
Mhm.
happens a lot. What motivates that person to take that action? And then you have business insights. What would motivate that business unit, that commercial function, that stakeholder? What's their business motivation, right? What are they getting out of it? What am I getting out of it? The other thing that I would say and leave with you is pick your battles. Like, know where you stand, like, think, always try to kind of measure a little bit, what's the impact? Like, what am I getting out of it? If I stand up and I really want this, like, why is this good for my own strategy, be it my own personal branding strategy at work, be it for my own commercial strategy, maybe I need this to unlock something else. Like, where does it fit, and how far am I willing to go for it, right? Am I going to bat for this? Am I against it? If I go against the decision, that's very noticeable when people do that. Like, think about also, like, where will that get me? When I do these exercises, what helps a lot for me, I have in the back here, I have a board, dry eraser board, and I try to start mapping it out. Like, you can also do it online. There's lots of like stakeholder mapping tools, and again, like, relating it back to a sales motion, like, you can really start planning it out, your stakeholders, what are their interests, what are their problems, what are their pain points, why are they behaving the way they're behaving, is anything else involved, right? So whatever's in your head, then put it down and start playing around with it a little bit. At the end of the day, you got to know whether it's worth what you're getting into or not. It sounds like common sense, but trust me, when you're in the middle of it, sometimes we don't have the objectivity. So again, take a step back, think about it, and then it's time to activate our communication muscles. So you've been practicing how to self promote. At the same time, believe it or not, a lot of people are also practicing how to communicate certain things or how to stand up for themselves or someone. And that will be part of it too, right? And the last thing that I will say, like, I think staying positive, remaining resilient and patient is key to any of this, right? Like, you don't
Absolutely.
have to win everything. You don't, there needs to be a plan around this. At least for me, I like to plan. That's why I'm in a strategy role. I love planning. So that's part of it as well.
I 100% agree with you. And it answers also Arian's question around talking about relationship building at the highest levels, right? And what I'll add to this is sometimes we see people at the very top as aliens, but they are not aliens. They are human beings. I will just go with building my business, right? The highest level that I ever achieved is probably, senior manager, director level in the corporate world. And I remember my first VP client coming to me, and I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to coach this guy. I've never been at his level. I'm an imposter. I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm going to get judged. There's nothing that he can learn from me. Right. And I remember messaging one of my career coaching colleagues and saying, "Hey, you coach a lot of people at the VP level. What is your process? Do you do things differently?" She said, "No. It's the exact process because guess what? Regardless of what level you are, you still have blockers, you still have fears, you still can't sell yourself because you're in it. And so even they need someone from the outside to help them articulate their value and to help them remember what they've done." So I said, okay, you know, if you say so. I remember having our first conversation with this client in the UAE, and he wanted to move to Canada, and
Mhm.
he did not accomplish what I've accomplished, which is building a career in Canada. So
Yeah.
there you go. Even though he's a VP and he's done so much in his life, he worked for companies, huge companies like Yahoo. I don't know if you all still know who Yahoo is, but there was something that he didn't know that I knew. And so know this, that despite it feeling like this VP is doing things at a larger scale, even if it's small, there might be something that you're good at that they're not good at. And they are human beings and they have their limitations. Okay. And so we ended up working together. It was amazing. And the reason he decided to work with me was because of my story and because of the relationship that I built with him, because I made him feel heard, because I allowed him to share with me his frustrations. As someone who has grown my business from 0 to 1, 4 years ago, I was invisible. I only had 500 followers. Today I have 30,000. I've worked with more than 200 people across the
Mhm.
world.
It's amazing.
I'll tell you that the way you get through this journey and putting yourself out there is just making people feel heard. That's all it takes. If you don't know what else to do, start there. Listen. That's why you have 2 ears.
Very good. Yeah.
And then you'll realize that everyone around you is a human being. And what I'll say as someone who is the CEO of my business, I can understand now how people at the C level feel. The higher you go up, it actually gets lonelier. And so, my friend, when you say that you can't socialize, I'd say you'd be surprised that this person might want to actually go for a coffee with you. And if they are completely unavailable, then go to the person at the highest level that is the most accessible to you and build that relationship. That's what I'll say.
I remember it was around a year and a half ago. To feed into that, I love your story, Nada. And someone on my team, one of the sales reps, decided, because we were discussing to son a bigger team meeting, this person decided he's just gonna walk up to our then CEO Bracken and invite him to come join our team meeting for like a quick hello and quick I don't know, like motivational booster or whatever, just for the fun of it, right? When we heard about that, to Ariane's point, we were like, oh my god, what why would anyone do this? But it
Yeah, they're
turns out,
normal and they love pizza and they have
yeah,
hobbies and they have favorite
yeah,
TV shows.
it was so funny because he was absolutely like, he came on, he talked for a few minutes, wanted to get to know us a little bit better. And he was just so happy, it was a non-pressure interaction for him, because he
Absolutely.
actually gets to talk to his people. And you'd be surprised. We do see our leaders high up there, and oh my God, but they're actually really curious, including myself. We're all curious, wanting to know, how are you? What do you do? What's going on in your team? Where do you see things going? Oh, have you tried this new tool that we've been using? What do you think about it? And a lot of people are that way. That doesn't go away just because you're vice president or you're, like you said, or a CEO. So trust me on that one. It'll come.
There you go, Eric. You just shared with us that you are more than capable of building relationships. The fact that you had lunch with a CEO and realized that they played Magic the Gathering.
Yeah.
I just wanted to take a moment and thank Alex for being here as well. Alex, thank you for having the courage to share your amazing story on my platform and on several platforms at your organization. Thank you for all the work that you do, helping people sell themselves and doing this on your own time. Thank you, everyone, for hanging with us till the end. I also wanted to take a moment and say, try not to get emotional, that I just hit 30,000 followers today. To me, those vanity metrics isn't what this is all about, but it is symbolic that I have built a community going from someone who is underrepresented, who didn't have the best time in the corporate world. So I appreciate you for supporting this. I definitely encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. You're all also going to love speaker that I had, Jeff Anderson, who also talks about navigating difficult stakeholders, improving the way we work in organizations. Speaking of the importance of networking, I do have a storytelling bootcamp that will help you identify your passion, your strength, and work on your messaging and tell your stories in a way that is compelling. How I got to where I am today, being a speaker, being someone who doesn't necessarily speak English as a first language, went into rabbit holes learning all these frameworks. And so my intention of creating an environment for people where they can practice is based on that. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And thank you, Alex, for joining us.